Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever felt that sudden silence one day? He's all in. Messages, attention, energy. The next day, it's like he vanished into the shadows. And you're left wondering, did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Should I reach out? Again, let me tell you something that could shift everything. He didn't pull away because he's gone. He pulled away to see if you would chase. Because for some men, especially those who aren't fully secure in themselves, pulling back becomes a power play, a test, an unconscious challenge. He wants to know, will you run after him? Will you validate his worth by proving yours is less? But here's the truth, and it's going to sting before it sets you free. And that's not attraction. That's training. You're training someone to disrespect your time, your emotions, your standards. Because the moment you run after someone who pulls back, you're no longer standing in your power. You're reacting from fear, and fear never creates connection. It creates dependency. When someone you care about starts to pull away emotionally, it can feel like rejection. The sudden drop in communication, the change in tone, the shift in energy, it all feels personal. And when we care, our instinct is to fix it. We want to close the gap, to make sure everything is okay, to bring things back to how they were. But what many people don't realize is that emotional distance isn't always about falling out of love or losing interest. Sometimes it's a test, a silent, strategic moment created not to push you away, but to pull a reaction out of you. This test isn't usually announced. He won't say, I'm going to stop calling you for 3 days just to see how you react. But emotionally, that's exactly what he's doing. He wants to see what version of you emerges in his absence. Do you start panicking? Do you over-text, over-apologize, or try to overcompensate? Or do you remain calm, grounded, and unshaken in your value? That gap he creates, it's designed to provoke a pattern, to see whether you'll chase or whether you'll choose self-respect. This is where emotional intelligence meets emotional endurance. Because reacting immediately when someone creates distance is easy. It's the emotional equivalent of flinching when something startles you. But what if you didn't flinch? What if, instead, you paused, observed, and understood that his silence might not be a rejection, but a reflection of his own insecurity? That his distance isn't necessarily about you. It's about what he's trying to figure out about himself and about you. Some men do this to see if the woman they're dating will abandon her standards to keep the connection alive. Others do it to create control in a dynamic where they feel emotionally exposed. And some don't even realize they're doing it. It's just a reflex, a deep-rooted behavioral test rooted in their past experiences, their wounds, or their fear of losing power. But here's the danger. If you take his pullback at face value and rush to close the space, you end up falling straight into the trap. You become the one chasing, the one anxious, the one proving. And once that happens, the dynamic shifts. You go from being equals to being someone who's now playing emotional catch-up. Not because you're less, but because you responded out of fear, not confidence. That's why understanding the intention behind his withdrawal is so important. It protects you from self-sabotage. Because instead of reacting from emotion, you begin responding from awareness. You begin to see his pullback not as a problem to fix, but as a moment to observe. You recognize that if someone is using emotional distance to measure your devotion, they're not building a connection, they're measuring control. The irony is, the very thing he's hoping to see, your emotional overinvestment, is what often makes you less attractive. When you chase, you validate the test. When you stay grounded, you pass it. Because confidence in those moments says everything. It communicates that you're not just looking for connection, you're looking for maturity, for reciprocity, for emotional honesty, not games. The moment you start chasing someone who has pulled away, you start losing a piece of yourself. It may not feel like it at first. After all, reaching out, checking in, trying to reconnect can seem like love, like care, like effort. But underneath those actions, especially when they come from fear or anxiety, there's often a quiet betrayal of your own self-worth. Because chasing isn't about connection, it's about desperation. It's about needing validation that someone still wants you, still sees you, still chooses you. And that need is what makes it dangerous. When a person pulls back and you instinctively move toward them to close the emotional gap, what you're really saying is, your distance matters more than my peace. You prioritize their silence over your dignity. You allow the imbalance to grow, and in doing so, you give them power, not the healthy kind, but the kind that says, I can treat you with uncertainty, and you'll still be here. Every time you chase, you communicate something about your standards. You tell them that even when they withdraw, you'll show up. Even when they offer inconsistency, you'll offer effort. Even when they stop giving, you'll keep pouring. And the more you do that, the more you flip the dynamic of the relationship. Suddenly, they're the prize and you're the pursuer. Not because they're more valuable, but because you've decided that their attention is worth compromising your own emotional safety for. There's a difference between showing someone you care and abandoning yourself to keep them. When you chase, you slowly chip away at the foundation of self-respect that healthy love requires. Because self-respect isn't just a concept, it's a boundary. It's the quiet strength that says, I can love you deeply, but I won't chase you when you walk away. It's the confidence that allows you to say, if you need space, take it, but I won't fill it with over-explaining or over-giving just to keep you close. The hardest part is that chasing often doesn't feel like a loss of dignity in the moment. It feels like trying, it feels like caring, it feels like holding on, but later, when the dust settles, when the silence stretches, when the person doesn't come back the way you hoped, they don't just see you as someone who cared. They see you as someone who needed them more than they valued themselves. The truth is, chasing doesn't pull people back in. If anything, it pushes them further away. Why? Because it tells them they don't have to meet you halfway, that you'll come all the way on your own. And once that dynamic is established, it's incredibly hard to reset. The more you chase, the more the other person learns they can retreat whenever they want and still keep your loyalty. You deserve more than to be someone's emotional safety net. You deserve to be with someone who doesn't make you question where you stand. Someone who doesn't need to test your love by disappearing. Someone who doesn't require you to abandon your pride just to stay close. Holding back from chasing when every part of you wants to reach out isn't easy. But it's powerful. It sends a message, not just to them, but to yourself, that your peace is not for sale and your self-respect is non-negotiable. When someone pulls away from you, your first instinct might be to speak up, to reach out, to fill the silence with explanations, questions, or declarations of care. But what most people don't realize is that sometimes the most powerful response isn't more words, it's silence. And not the kind of silence that's cold or passive-aggressive, but the kind that's grounded, intentional, and full of quiet strength. Because when someone creates distance, your stillness can communicate far more than any text, call, or desperate effort ever could. In that moment of silence, they begin to notice something. The pattern they expected, you rushing in, you trying harder, you over-explaining, doesn't come. Instead, there's space. And in that space, they start to hear their own thoughts more clearly. They start to wonder why you haven't reacted the way others might. And that wondering, that's where your power is. When you remain silent after someone pulls away, what you're really saying is, I'm not here to beg for clarity. I'm not here to convince you of my value. I'm here if you want something real, but I won't chase after confusion. That energy is rare, and people feel it. The truth is, words lose their weight when they're used to compensate for someone else's emotional absence. The more you speak into the silence, the more you teach someone that they can step back and still expect you to step forward. But when you stay quiet, when you allow their distance to exist without filling it, you shift the entire dynamic. This kind of silence is not weakness. It's restraint. It's wisdom. It's the understanding that if you have to run after someone just to keep their attention, then you're not actually being loved. You're being tolerated. And love isn't about constant pursuit. It's about mutual presence, about two people choosing each other, not one person always reaching while the other retreats. People often think their words will fix the distance, that if they just say the right thing, they'll get the old version of that person back. But real connections aren't built on fixing someone's pullbacks with effort. They're built when two people show up without needing to be chased or convinced. And sometimes, the only way someone truly sees your value is when you stop trying to prove it. There's a shift that happens when you choose silence over reaction. The emotional energy they once took for granted disappears. The attention they expected from you doesn't arrive, and they're left with the very thing they tried to create: distance. But instead of it being a power play, it becomes a mirror that shows them exactly what life feels like without your presence, without your words, without your emotional investment. And in many cases, that silence speaks louder than anything else. Because what silence really says is, I've said all I need to say through how I show up. If that's not enough, I'm not going to beg you to see it. It reminds them that your energy is a privilege, not a guarantee. It creates space for them to reflect, to feel, and, if they truly care, to return on their own terms. Not everyone will respond the way you want when you hold your silence. Some will stay gone, some will stay distant, but that silence will always protect your dignity. It will always remind you that you don't have to overcompensate for someone else's emotional confusion. You are allowed to pause, breathe, and let the silence speak for you. Because when someone matters, they will find their way through the silence and not expect you to always break it. When someone you care about pulls away, the natural response is to chase. You want to know what went wrong. You want reassurance. You want to fix the disconnection before it grows. But here's the truth that many overlook. Emotionally secure people don't chase uncertainty. They don't try to control the outcome of something they didn't break. They understand that their value doesn't increase by proving it to someone who's unsure. An emotionally secure person knows their worth, and that self-assurance shapes their response to emotional withdrawal. They don't panic when someone goes quiet. They don't beg for love, and they don't shrink themselves to make the other person more comfortable. Instead, they pause, they observe, and they allow space to reveal the truth. That kind of strength isn't built overnight. It comes from learning that your value doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself, especially when others hesitate to. Chasing someone who's unsure is exhausting. It puts your emotional well-being in someone else's hands. And no matter how much effort you pour in, it never feels like enough. Because you're not responding to love, you're responding to emotional instability. And when you try to find safety in someone who keeps pulling away, you're setting yourself up to be anxious, confused, and resentful. That's not love, that's self-abandonment. Emotionally secure people don't abandon themselves. They know that if someone needs space, they can give it, without internalizing it as rejection. They don't spiral into self-doubt. Instead, they stay grounded in the truth someone else's distance doesn't diminish their worth. They don't take it personally. They don't start chasing breadcrumbs. They trust that if someone values the connection, that person will make the effort to return and reconnect. And if they don't, that silence becomes clarity. The strength of emotional security lies in not needing to chase what is unclear. It's in standing firm in your truth, even when someone else is unsure of theirs. It's the quiet confidence that says, if you pull away, I won't follow. I'll give you the space you need, and I'll use that space to focus on me. That's not arrogance. That's emotional maturity. Because maturity isn't about holding everything together. It's about knowing when to let go and when to wait without fear. Insecure people often mistake chasing for love. They believe that the harder they try, the more likely they are to win someone back. But love isn't something you earn by chasing. Real love is mutual. It's balanced. And it doesn't require you to prove your worth by losing your peace. Emotionally secure people understand this. They don't chase because they don't fear the outcome. They trust that what is meant for them won't need to be chased. It will naturally stay close. It will lean in, not pull away. There's power in being the one who can sit in uncertainty without losing your balance. It means you're no longer operating from fear. You're not trying to rescue the connection, and you're not desperate for answers. You're letting life show you what's real, and in that stillness, you reclaim your emotional power. You deserve someone who brings you peace, not confusion. Someone who stays, not someone who disappears to test your reaction. Emotional security is not about never feeling hurt. It's about not letting that hurt dictate how you show up for yourself. It's knowing that you can feel the absence and still not abandon your own presence. That's where your power is. Not in chasing love, but in standing still long enough to see who truly values yours. When someone creates distance, the most revealing thing you can do is nothing. Not because you don't care, but because your stillness allows the truth to come to the surface. You see, when someone pulls away, most people panic. They rush to close the gap. They send the text, make the call, try to fix what feels broken. But when you step back and allow space to breathe, you give that person the opportunity to show you what they really want. You stop carrying the entire emotional weight of the connection, and you start letting their actions, or lack of them, tell the story. The truth is, if someone genuinely values you, distance won't be used as a tool to control you. It won't be a tactic to make you chase. It won't be a power play. It might be a moment of reflection, a sign they need space to think, but it won't be manipulation. And if they do use it as a test, then your silence becomes their mirror. In that quiet, they begin to confront the consequences of their withdrawal. They start to feel the absence of your energy, your consistency, your presence. And that absence becomes more powerful than anything you could have said. When you stop chasing, when you stop trying to fill the void they created, you force the situation to reveal itself. You find out whether the connection was real or if it was just dependent on you doing all the emotional labor. And that's not easy, because sitting in that silence can be uncomfortable. It can make you second guess yourself. It can make you want to reach for comfort, even if that comfort comes at the cost of your self-respect. But in those moments, your patience is everything. Letting the distance reveal their intentions isn't about playing games. It's about clarity. It's about understanding that you don't need to force anything that's meant for you. You don't need to beg for consistency or explain your worth. When someone cares, when they truly see you and value what you bring, they don't leave you in emotional limbo. They don't create confusion and call it space. They communicate, they return, they show up. And if they don't, that silence becomes your answer. Not because you pushed them away, but because you gave them the freedom to come back. And they didn't. That realization may hurt, but it also frees you. It frees you from hoping for someone who wasn't invested. It frees you from holding on to a potential that only you were trying to realize. Distance is not just space, it's revelation. It shows you who leans in and who fades away. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to step back and observe. To stop explaining. To stop rescuing. To stop trying to make someone care in the way you do. Because love doesn't survive in pressure. It grows in presence, in effort, in return. If someone wants you, truly wants you, they will close the space. They will take the steps. You won't have to chase them into clarity. They'll walk toward it willingly. That's how you know. Not by how they act when things are easy, but by what they do when there's silence. When there's nothing forcing their hand. That's when you see who's real. That's when you stop guessing. That's when the truth becomes clear. When someone pulls away from you, it's easy to slip into their emotional frame. Suddenly, you're playing by their rules. You're responding to their withdrawal, their silence, their confusion. You're no longer leading with your truth. You're reacting to theirs. And the problem with that is simple. The person who controls the frame controls the connection. They set the pace. They decide how close or distant things feel. They determine when you talk, how much you share, and how anxious you become waiting for them to show up. And if you don't hold your own frame, you become a supporting role in their emotional story instead of the author of your own. Emotional framing is powerful because it shapes perception. When someone starts pulling away and you chase, you're operating inside their frame. They dictate the terms of closeness. But when you pause, when you hold steady, when you don't respond immediately with panic or pursuit, you take back your authority. You're no longer asking, how do I get them back? You're asking, do they still belong in my world if they choose to disappear? So many people lose themselves in someone else's uncertainty. They forget that they're allowed to step back, to ask questions, to assess whether this dynamic still aligns with their values. But you can't do that if you're emotionally flinching every time the other person shifts. You can't be grounded if you're always on edge waiting for a sign, a reply, a signal that you still matter. That emotional imbalance is exactly what happens when you give someone control over the frame. To hold your frame means you stay rooted in your standards, not your fears. It means you don't lower your expectations just to keep someone who's already halfway out the door. You don't rewrite your boundaries to fit into their comfort zone. You let the discomfort of distance reveal the truth instead of trying to soothe it with over-effort. And that takes strength. It takes emotional maturity. But most importantly, it takes clarity. Clarity about who you are, what you deserve, and how much of yourself you're willing to give to someone who might be unsure about you. People often mistake reaction for connection. They think, if I react quickly, if I respond the right way, maybe I can fix this. But real connection doesn't come from emotional agility. It comes from emotional alignment. If you're constantly adjusting yourself to keep someone close, they're not staying because they want you. They're staying because you're easy to control. That's not intimacy. That's imbalance. The irony is, the more you try to please, the more you bend, the more likely they are to keep pulling back. Because people sense when you're chasing, they sense when you're afraid to lose them. And instead of making them come closer, that fear makes them feel more powerful. But when you hold your frame, when you stay calm, when you don't flinch at their absence, something shifts. They begin to realize that their distance doesn't move you, that you're not waiting for breadcrumbs, that you're not sitting by your phone hoping they remember your worth. And that's where the dynamic changes. That's when they start to wonder, why isn't she reacting? Why is she so calm? Why does she seem okay without me? Because you are. You're okay because you've chosen not to live inside their frame. You've chosen your own. And in that choice, you reclaim not just your power, but your peace. There comes a point in every connection where your silence, your boundaries, and your refusal to beg become more powerful than any words you could say. When someone pulls away or tests your emotional limits, it's tempting to overextend yourself just to pull them back in. You want to remind them of what you bring to their life. You want them to see your value. But the painful truth is this: the moment you start begging for love, even in subtle ways, by over-apologizing, by initiating all the conversations, by clinging to their inconsistency, you begin to erode your self-worth in their eyes and in your own. What people remember most about you isn't how much you tried to win them back. It's how you held yourself when they created distance. It's how you responded when they tested your place in their life. When you choose dignity over desperation, you leave a mark, a silent, undeniable imprint of strength. Because while love can be emotional, it should never cost you your emotional foundation. And when it does, that's not love. It's a lesson. Begging for love is often disguised as effort. You tell yourself you're just being loyal, just being patient, just being supportive. But what you're really doing is proving yourself to someone who stopped earning the right to have your energy. And what makes this dynamic even harder is that it usually doesn't start all at once. It begins slowly, with one unanswered message, one broken plan, one moment of hesitation from them. And before you know it, you're trying harder than ever for someone who's already started pulling away. But this is the test. This is the moment where who you are meets what you believe you deserve. And if you know your worth, if you truly know it, you won't run after someone who's showing you inconsistency. You won't chase someone who leaves you in doubt. You'll step back, not to manipulate, not to play games, but to protect your heart from being shaped by someone else's confusion. The most unforgettable people are not the ones who scream their worth. They are the ones who walk away quietly when they are not met with the same respect and energy. Their absence becomes a presence, because people don't forget the ones who knew when to stop trying. They don't forget the strength of someone who loved deeply but loved themselves more. That kind of self-possession leaves a mark that desperation never could. When you stop begging, you start observing. You start seeing clearly who's showing up and who's just stringing you along. And you create space for the right person to find you and for the wrong one to realize what they lost. Most importantly, you show yourself what you're made of, that you can be rejected without collapsing, that you can feel the sting of silence without letting it break you, that you can stand in the fire of uncertainty and still choose peace over panic. Self-worth isn't something you just talk about. It's proven in moments like these, in the quiet, painful pauses where you could chase but don't, where you could beg but breathe instead. And in that stillness, you begin to build a deeper kind of power, one that doesn't need validation to exist, one that doesn't fall apart when someone else fails to see your value, one that says, I'm not afraid to lose someone who's okay with losing me. Because once you truly believe that, you become unforgettable for all the right reasons. When he pulls away to see if you'll chase, remember this isn't just about him, it's about you. It's about the story you choose to write in that silence. Will you abandon yourself to prove your worth to someone who's unsure? Or will you stand still in your value, knowing that real love never needs to be hunted down? Don't fail this test. Let your stillness be your strength. Let your dignity speak louder than your desperation. Because the right person won't test your worth by disappearing. They'll recognize it and never risk losing it. Thank you.